Urban Chaos Riot Response is an aptly named game where you're basically Batman without the constraints of morality. The violence is excessive, constant, and occasionally hilarious, which is fitting as the developer is Rocksteady, famous for the Arkham series of Batman games. Whereas Batman would restrain a criminal, in Urban Chaos you dispatch them with Molotov cocktails. It was Rocksteady's first game, releasing in 2006 for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox, and remains a hidden gem. The game's designer, Paul Crocker, would even go on to co-direct Halo Infinite. It also remains one of the best looking games for the PS2. And thanks to the Havoc engine used in games like PsyOps, there's a huge emphasis on physics. But we'll get into the details of that later. You play a silent protagonist, Nick Mason, a member of the newly formed specialized police unit, T-0. Your goal is to stamp out the Burners gang, who may as well be a standing army for how many weapons they're bringing to the table. The game takes place in a city that's never named, but it does feel a lot like Chicago, which isn't helped by the snowfall in many of the levels. The story often takes a backseat as it's used to justify why you're shooting guys in the streets, subway, and of course the sewers. I think games with a sewer level are the majority of games I've covered on this channel.
Come here!
Since you're technically a cop, you can subdue enemies with some non-lethal weaponry like a taser. As you play, you'll occasionally get these bonus objectives during a level that ask you to apprehend a gang member. These are optional, but they do reward stars, which grant you new weapons, equipment, and upgrades. The campaign is a linear level-based affair, but there's lots of incentives to replay levels and get as many stars as you can. As you play through the campaign, you'll also unlock these bonus challenge levels. They're a bit like side quests in an RPG. There's 204 medals in total, and the campaign will take you about 6 hours to complete, so there's a lot here. Thankfully, the gunplay is where the game shines. Sure, it feels great, but there's also so many small details. I just did a video on 25 to Life, and in it, I pointed out how enemies don't react to getting hit. The opposite is true in Urban Chaos. Bullets make noticeable impacts, headshots will pop heads like watermelons, and grenades, they'll send guys flying. Speaking of, you can shoot projectiles like thrown cleavers out of the air. How cool is that? As for weapons, you got a normal shotgun, assault rifle, and pistol, but there's a bunch of unique weapons too. A magnum, machine pistols you can dual wield, and even a chainsaw. Most unique of all is your Riot shield. This thing can withstand everything. It never breaks, and even grenades and fire can't get past it. Best of all, you can reload any gun while holding it up. This is important because you can't take too many hits even on the easier difficulties. You'll also often run into these hostage situations, which require you to wait for the enemy to reload, at which point you can land a headshot. You need to stand in the open, taking shots with your shield in order to do this. Honestly, I get the idea of these hostage situations, but the game does them over and over and over again. It gets real tiring, and this is an issue with the game itself. It's fairly long for a shooter, and it has a lot going for it, and the foundation here is good, but it just doesn't do enough with it. You have the medal system, which asks you to complete challenges like X number of headshots during a level. You can find hidden masks, you got the hostage situations I mentioned earlier, and then you got some on-rail sections like from a helicopter. But even with all this, I was a little burnt out by the end. None of these are as good as the combat itself. And unlike side activities in many games, these are just bad versions of the combat. For example, fishing in an RPG is fun because the fishing itself is fun and totally different from the game's combat. They're not competing against each other. Meanwhile, the hostage situations in Urban Chaos, it's just the combat gameplay, but it's restricted. And bad. When we're not shooting guys, we'll be turning off fire hazards and instructing firemen to break down doors. Occasionally, you'll need to rescue a few guys trapped in a burning building. Accompanying you will be a fireman who you can give simple orders to. Because of the smoke, you can use a gas mask / thermal sights combo to see. These missions were a real drag because you're on a timer. I appreciate Rocksteady trying to change things up, it's just all their ideas are kinda bad. Thankfully, they're not horrible and none of them overstay their welcome, plus the core gameplay is enjoyable, so it's not too bad. Also, you can see your footprints in the snow. How cool is that?
This is Channel 7 News. This is Lanny York for Channel 7 News. Death and destruction hit the city again last month. St. Valentine's Street Station was the target of gangs in an attack that left hundreds dead and many more injured.
As you go from level to level, you'll get these intermission cutscenes in the form of news broadcasts. This was an incredibly popular way of dumping exposition on the player in the early 2000s, though it's missing a lot of the charm you'd see in games like Red Alert.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
There's only the barest of story beats here. You're an elite cop who's part of T-Zero, who has a zero-tolerance policy on crime, and your primary antagonists are the Burner Gang, like I mentioned earlier. There's some background lore given, such as the city's approval of the new unit being low early on, then growing as you perform more acts around the city. T-Zero is a controversial unit, and there's some lip service paid to that. This helps give the game world some life. Towards the end of the game, you'll need to rescue the leader of T-Zero, Adam Wolf. these fucking names, man. After saving him from the burners, we find their secret base. Also, they have a WMD. Yeah, so the story throws out all semblance of realism by the end. So you both go in together, kick ass, and Adam Wolf himself disarms the bomb. You'd think we'd have a bomb guy, but guess not. The president himself thanks the two of you because apparently this bomb would have killed 300 million people. Just for reference for you guys, the US population is about 320 million. Yeah, I don't know, it's really stupid, but fun. I just wish they owned it more. The game's got a really strange tone. It never goes completely off the wall, other than how hard your superior is for killing people, but it does have a very post-9/11 hurrah attitude. It doesn't do it in a way that seems like satire, which can be a bit disturbing. I wish the game dove into it shamelessly. Make it a satire. Give me mission briefs that explain how the gang members are freedom-hating anarchists. Also, probably communists. I don't know, play it up. I'm chucking cleavers at a guy who's firing rocket launchers at me in the sewers. This shit ain't exactly highbrow entertainment.
What the? Dirty hippie bastard! Mason, he's got me!
While it's not the greatest shooter, Urban Chaos has a lot going for it. It tried to do things differently, and really, it wasn't that bad. The side content isn't the best, but the shield is really interesting as a weapon. The medal system keeps you coming back and incentivizes you to play in new ways you otherwise wouldn't. Also, their production values are just phenomenal. No, really, this might be one of the best looking games on the PS2. It's certainly in the top 10 most impressive from a graphical standpoint. The real-time shadows, particle effects, and the movie-style camera work in some of the cutscenes, it's all top-notch stuff. Nothing about this game feels cheap. And also, nothing else quite plays like it. It's one of a kind, and the fact that it was developed by a game company as loved as Rocksteady, that makes it a really interesting part of gaming history.